Red and blue lights violently pierced the pitch-black Georgia night, turning a quiet drive home into a living nightmare. When a hostile officer approached the car with his hand resting heavily on his holster, he thought he had the ultimate upper hand. He couldn't have been more wrong. The digital clock on the dashboard of the 2023 Chevrolet Tahoe read 1:14 a.m. The rain had just begun to fall, a light, misty drizzle that slicked the winding asphalt of Route 9, just outside of Pine Valley, Georgia. It was a notoriously quiet stretch of road, flanked on both sides by dense, towering pines that seemed to swallow the glow of the headlights. James Montgomery kept his eyes locked on the road, his hands resting lightly on the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 positions. Beside him, his wife, Maya, was softly dozing against the passenger window, her jacket pulled tight across her shoulders. They were on their way back to their home in suburban Atlanta after celebrating their 10th wedding anniversary at a quiet, secluded vineyard upstate. It had been a perfect weekend, a rare escape from the grinding, high-stakes reality of their daily lives. But as James guided the heavy SUV around a sweeping bend, the serenity of the night was shattered. From the absolute darkness of a hidden access road, a set of headlights flared to life, aggressively bright and blinding in the rearview mirror. James instinctively checked his speed. He was doing 42 in a 45-mile-per-hour zone. He hadn't swerved. He hadn't braked erratically. His registration was current, and his taillights were fully functional. Yet the vehicle behind him closed the distance rapidly, riding the Tahoe's bumper so closely that James could no longer see the other car's headlights. "Just pass," James muttered under his breath, maintaining his speed and keeping the wheel perfectly steady. Instead, the darkness was suddenly eradicated by a blinding eruption of strobe lights. Red and blue splashed violently across the interior of the Tahoe, waking Maya with a sudden, sharp gasp. "What is it? What happened?" she asked, sitting bolt upright, her hands instantly going to the dashboard. "Nothing, babe. Just a traffic stop," James said, his voice dropping into the low, steady, and terrifyingly calm register he always used when situations turned volatile. "Stay still. Don't reach for your purse." James activated his right turn signal, slowly easing the heavy SUV onto the narrow gravel shoulder. He put the vehicle in park, immediately turned off the engine, and hit the button to roll down all 4 windows. The cold, damp night air flooded the cabin, carrying the smell of wet earth and pine needles. Next, he switched on the dome light, illuminating the interior in a bright, unforgiving wash of white. Finally, he placed both of his hands flat on top of the steering wheel, interlacing his fingers. Maya mirrored his actions, placing her hands flat on her thighs. The tension in the car was suffocating, heavy with the unspoken collective anxiety that accompanied being a black couple pulled over in the dead of night on an isolated southern road. In the side mirror, James watched the driver's side door of the police cruiser swing open. The silhouette of a large, broad-shouldered man stepped out. He didn't approach immediately. Instead, he stood behind the open door of his cruiser for a long, agonizing moment, watching the Tahoe, letting the psychological pressure build. When the officer finally began to walk forward, his pace was deliberately slow, his boots crunching loudly against the wet gravel. In his left hand, he held a high-powered Streamlight tactical flashlight. His right hand rested casually, yet menacingly, on the unclasped strap of his duty holster. As he reached the rear of the Tahoe, the officer slapped his heavy hand against the tail light, a standard procedure to leave a fingerprint, but done with a violent smack that made Maya flinch. The officer stepped up to the driver's side window and instantly shined the blinding beam of the flashlight directly into James's eyes. "Turn that dome light off," a gruff, gravelly voice commanded. James blinked against the blinding glare, keeping his hands perfectly still on the wheel. "Officer, I turned it on for your safety, so you could see clearly into the vehicle." "I said turn it off, boy," the voice barked, the flashlight beam inching closer to the glass. "You don't tell me what's safe." James's jaw tightened. The use of the word boy hung in the cold air, a deliberate and calculated insult meant to establish dominance. Maya shifted uncomfortably, her breath hitching, but James didn't take the bait. He slowly unclasped his right hand, keeping his movements smooth and telegraphed. "I am turning off the dome light now," James announced, pressing the button on the ceiling console. The cabin plunged back into darkness, illuminated only by the frantic strobes of the cruiser behind them. James immediately returned his hands to the wheel. The flashlight swept aggressively over the interior of the pristine Tahoe, lingering on the leather seats, the expensive dashboard display, and finally on Maya, before snapping back to James's face. "License, registration, and proof of insurance," the officer demanded. "Do you mind telling me why I was pulled over, officer?" James asked, his tone polite but entirely devoid of fear. Officer Mitchell Higgins, whose name tag caught a brief reflection of the strobe lights, leaned in closer to the window, invading James's personal space. The smell of stale coffee and chewing tobacco wafted into the car. "I asked for your paperwork, not a conversation," Higgins snarled. "You were swerving all over the center line back there. Smells like you might have been drinking." It was a blatant lie. James hadn't touched a drop of alcohol all evening, having stuck to sparkling water at dinner, and the Tahoe's lane assist feature hadn't chimed once. It was the textbook pretext for an unlawful search. "I haven't had anything to drink, officer," James stated calmly. "My wallet is in my back right pocket. My registration and insurance are in the glove compartment. How would you like me to proceed?" Higgins sneered, the flashlight beam wavering slightly. "Get the wallet first, nice and slow. You make any sudden moves, we're going to have a real bad night." "I am reaching for my wallet," James narrated, slowly leaning forward and reaching behind his hip. He extracted the slim leather bifold with 2 fingers and pulled out his Georgia driver's license. He handed it through the window. Higgins snatched it, shining his light on the plastic card. "James Montgomery," he read aloud, his tone dripping with skepticism. He looked up, scanning the luxurious interior of the Tahoe once more. "This is a mighty expensive rig, James. You rent this for the weekend to impress the lady?" "It's my vehicle," James replied evenly. "Is that right?" Higgins chuckled, a dark, humorless sound. "What do you do for a living that affords you an $80,000 truck?" "I work for the government," James answered smoothly. It wasn't a lie, but it was vague enough not to escalate the situation by appearing to throw his weight around. Years of specialized training had taught James that in these moments, revealing authority to a power-tripping local cop often made things much more dangerous before it made them better. He needed Higgins to play his hand completely. "Government work," Higgins repeated mockingly. "Right. Go ahead and get the registration. Let's see whose name is really on this car." James gestured to Maya. "My wife is going to open the glove compartment now." Maya opened the latch, retrieved the folded documents, and handed them to James, who passed them through the window. Higgins grabbed the papers without looking at them. "Keep your hands on the wheel. Both of you, keep your hands where I can see them." He stepped away from the window, his boots crunching loudly as he walked back to his cruiser, leaving James and Maya alone in the cold, tense darkness. The minutes stretched into an agonizing eternity. In the Tahoe, the silence was deafening, broken only by the steady, rhythmic swoosh of the windshield wipers cutting across the misty glass and the crackle of Higgins's radio in the distance. "James," Maya whispered, her voice trembling just slightly. She was a tough woman, a corporate litigator who commanded courtrooms. But the isolated road and the blatant aggression of the officer had stripped away her usual armor. "What is he doing back there? It's been 10 minutes. "He's running my plates. He's looking for a warrant, a suspended license, a typo. Anything he can use to justify dragging this out," James replied softly, his eyes flicking between the side mirror and the rear view. "He's running a terror campaign, Maya. He wants us scared." "I'm going to start recording," she said, reaching slowly for her phone resting in the center console. "No," James commanded, his voice sharp but quiet. "Not yet. Leave the phone. If he sees the screen light up, he's going to claim you reached for a weapon. Just sit tight. Let him make his mistakes." Maya swallowed hard, pulling her hand back and resting it on her knee. "He's looking for a reason to hurt you, James. I can see it in his eyes." "I know," James said, his jaw locked tight. "But he picked the wrong car tonight." In the side mirror, James watched a second set of headlights emerge from the darkness. Another police cruiser pulled up behind Higgins's vehicle, its light bar flashing aggressively. A second officer stepped out, younger, slimmer, walking with a nervous, hurried gait. Officer Kevin Bradley. Higgins met Bradley between the cruisers. James couldn't hear the words, but he could read the body language. Higgins was pointing aggressively at the Tahoe, nodding his head, building a narrative. The rookie, Bradley, looked uneasy, shifting his weight from foot to foot, his hand resting on his belt. A moment later, Higgins broke away from the rookie and marched back toward the Tahoe. The swagger in his step was heavier now, bolstered by the presence of his backup. Bradley followed a few paces behind, taking up a tactical position near the rear passenger quarter panel, his flashlight trained on Maya. Higgins stopped at the driver's window. He didn't hand back the license or the registration. Instead, he rested his left forearm heavily on the doorframe, leaning his weight into the vehicle, trapping the smell of wet wool and aggression inside the cabin. "All right, James," Higgins said, his voice dropping into a menacing drawl. "Here's how this is going to go. I need you to go ahead and unbuckle your seatbelt with your left hand and step out of the vehicle." James didn't move. He kept his hands locked on the steering wheel. "Officer, I'd like to know why I'm being ordered out of my car. You have my license and my registration. They are both valid. If you're writing me a citation for swerving, you can hand me the ticket here." Higgins's face hardened, the smug smile vanishing instantly. His right hand dropped squarely onto the grip of his service weapon. The heavy snap of the holster's retention strap being unclipped echoed loudly over the sound of the rain. Maya gasped, pressing her back hard against the passenger seat. "I am not asking you to step out, boy," Higgins snarled, his voice rising in volume, meant for the dash cam in his cruiser to pick up. "I am giving you a lawful order. You are acting nervously. You are refusing to comply. Now step out of the vehicle before I drag you through this window." "Officer," Maya interjected, her legal training overriding her fear. "He is perfectly calm. Under Pennsylvania versus Mims, you have the right to order him out, but you have no articulable, reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed. We are fully cooperating." Higgins snapped his flashlight directly into Maya's eyes, blinding her. "Shut your mouth, lady. Nobody asked you a damn thing. You speak again, I'll pull you out and put you in the dirt right next to him." "Hey," James barked, his voice suddenly cutting through the air like a whip. It wasn't the voice of a scared citizen. It was a voice accustomed to extreme authority. "You do not speak to my wife that way. I am stepping out of the vehicle." "Do it," Higgins challenged, taking a half step back, his hand still gripping his sidearm. "I am unbuckling my seatbelt," James announced, moving with deliberate robotic precision. I am opening the door with my left hand. The heavy door of the Tahoe swung open. James slowly pivoted in his seat and stepped out onto the wet asphalt. Standing at full height, James was an imposing figure, 6'3", broad-shouldered and entirely composed. He towered over Higgins, a physical reality that clearly infuriated the aggressive officer. "Turn around and face the vehicle. Put your hands on the roof," Higgins ordered, pulling a pair of metal handcuffs from his belt. "Am I under arrest?" James asked, turning slowly and placing his palms flat on the cold, wet metal of the Tahoe's roof. "You're being detained," Higgins sneered, stepping in close and aggressively kicking James's feet apart, forcing him into a wide, uncomfortable stance. Higgins began a rough, invasive pat-down, his hands slapping harshly against James's sides and waist. "You think you're smart, huh? You think because you talk nice and wear a fancy watch you're untouchable out here? I think you're making a catastrophic mistake," James said calmly, staring at his own reflection in the tinted glass of his car. Higgins laughed coldly. "I'll tell you what I think. I think I smell marijuana coming from this vehicle, and that gives me probable cause to search this pretty little truck." "We don't smoke, neither of us," James stated flatly. "You don't smell anything." "Are you calling a sworn officer of the law a liar?" Higgins demanded, pressing his forearm hard into the center of James's back, pinning him painfully against the roof of the SUV. "Officer Higgins," James said, his voice dropping an octave, completely devoid of fear. It was the icy tone of a predator warning off a scavenger. "I am giving you one final opportunity to de-escalate this situation. Give me my license, let my wife and I get back in our car, and walk away." The sheer audacity of the demand stunned Higgins for a fraction of a second. But his ego quickly overpowered his common sense. He pressed his forearm harder into James's spine, the metal of the handcuffs clinking loudly near James's left ear. "You don't give me orders, boy," Higgins hissed, his breath hot on James's neck. "You're going in cuffs, and I'm tearing that truck apart." Higgins grabbed James's left wrist, intending to wrench it behind his back. "Before you put those cuffs on me," James said, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet night, freezing Higgins in his tracks. "I need to inform you that I have secondary identification in the inner left pocket of my jacket, and for your own career, I highly suggest you look at it before you make a move you cannot undo." Higgins paused, his grip on James's wrist tightening. The rookie, Bradley, stepped closer, shining his light cautiously. "What are you talking about?" Higgins demanded, suspicion and rage battling in his voice. "Reach into my inner left pocket, Higgins," James ordered. The word officer completely dropped. "Take it out." Higgins hesitated, his thick fingers hovering just inches from the dark fabric of the jacket. The authoritative, unwavering tone in James's voice was completely foreign to the officer. It was not the desperate pleading of a civilian trying to bluff his way out of a costly traffic citation. Nor was it the panicked aggression of a cornered criminal. It was the absolute icy command of a man who possessed ultimate authority and knew exactly how to wield it. Still gripping James's left wrist with brutal force, Higgins gritted his teeth, determined not to lose face in front of his subordinate. He used his free hand to violently yank the zipper of James's rain jacket down, exposing the inner lining. He aggressively reached his hand into the interior breast pocket, expecting to find a concealed carry permit or perhaps a secondary wallet. Instead, his fingers brushed against smooth, premium leather. Higgins pulled the object out into the biting cold air. It was a dark, heavy, tri-fold leather credential case. Higgins stepped back, keeping one hand hovering dangerously near his unclasped holster, while he used his other hand to point the high-powered Streamlight tactical flashlight directly at the object. With a flick of his thumb, he flipped the leather case open. The bright, blinding beam of the flashlight hit the gleaming, solid gold shield inside, refracting the light back into Higgins's eyes with absolute brilliance. For a moment, the world seemed to violently stop spinning. The heavy rain pattering against the metallic roof of the Tahoe was suddenly the only sound echoing across the desolate stretch of Route 9. The crickets seemed to stop chirping. The wind died down below the majestic, heavily detailed golden crest of the Department of Justice. Large, uncompromising black letters spelled out a reality that Higgins could scarcely comprehend. Federal Bureau of Investigation. On the opposite side of the leather fold, a crisp, highly secure federal identification card stared back at the terrified local officer. It featured James's stern, unsmiling face against a sterile blue background. The black text beneath the photograph read clearly, James P. Montgomery, Supervisory Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Counterterrorism Division. At the very bottom of the card, it was officially signed by Christopher Wray, Director of the FBI. Higgins physically stopped breathing. The oxygen was entirely sucked from his lungs. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving his heavily weathered skin a pale, sickly grey under the frantic strobe lights of his police cruiser. The arrogant, tyrannical swagger that had inflated his chest just seconds prior vanished instantly, replaced by an absolute, freezing, paralyzing dread. His hands, which had been so quick to grab, shove, and intimidate, suddenly began to shake violently. The flashlight beam trembled erratically against the wet asphalt, casting wild shadows into the pine trees. "Officer Bradley," James spoke, his voice cutting cleanly through the thick, suffocating silence of the night. He didn't yell. He didn't need to raise his voice an inch. "Come over here and look at exactly what your partner is holding in his hand." The rookie, Kevin Bradley, swallowed hard, the sound audible over the rayon. He slowly holstered his own flashlight and stepped cautiously toward Higgins, his boots splashing in the shallow puddles. He leaned in cautiously to look over the older officer's trembling shoulder. When Bradley's eyes registered the unmistakable gold shield and the bold letters of the FBI, he audibly gasped, instantly taking two massive, frantic steps backward. He threw his hands up in the air in a desperate, placating gesture, treating the leather credential case as if it were a live, unpinned grenade ready to detonate. "Oh my God," Bradley whispered, his voice cracking with sheer terror. Mitch, what did you do? He's a federal agent." James slowly, deliberately lowered his hands from the wet roof of the Tahoe and turned around to fully face the two officers. He didn't wait for permission to move. The entire power dynamic of the traffic stop had violently and irreversibly inverted. James was no longer the helpless suspect. He was instantaneously the highest-ranking law enforcement official within a 100-mile radius, possessing the unilateral power to dismantle their careers, their freedom, and their entire department. "My name is Supervisory Special Agent James Montgomery," James stated with glacial calmness, taking a deliberate step directly toward Higgins, closing the physical distance between them. Higgins stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own heavy-duty boots in his desperation to retreat. "I am based out of the Atlanta field office. I run a specialized joint task force investigating violent domestic extremist groups and organized corruption. And you, Officer Higgins, have just unlawfully detained a federal agent, threatened my wife with severe physical violence, and aggressively attempted to fabricate probable cause to illegally search a government-issued fleet vehicle." I didn't know," Higgins stammered, his normally gravelly, intimidating voice reducing to a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. "You should have declared yourself immediately. Standard procedure dictates you announce your weapon. Do not attempt to lecture me on standard procedure, James interrupted sharply, taking another imposing step forward, forcing Higgins to retreat until his back slammed hard against the front quarter panel of his own idling police cruiser. Standard procedure requires establishing articulable, reasonable suspicion before ordering a compliant driver out of their vehicle in the dead of night. Standard procedure involves treating American citizens with basic human respect, not addressing grown men as boy. Standard procedure strictly forbids fabricating traffic violations, and it certainly forbids lying about the smell of non-existent narcotics to systematically violate the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution. Inside the Tahoe, Maya rolled down the passenger window completely. Her earlier, genuine fear had been entirely replaced by the cold, calculating, and ruthless observation of a veteran corporate litigator watching a hostile witness completely implode on the stand. She leaned forward, the soft ambient dashboard lights illuminating her sharp, intelligent features. "Officer Higgins," Maya said, her voice dripping with absolute ice. "I think you should know that you are currently being recorded by the Tahoe's internal dashboard and cabin camera surveillance system. It automatically activates and uploads real-time encrypted footage to a secure federal cloud server the exact moment the vehicle is shifted into park during any traffic stop. Every single aggressive word you just said, every unconstitutional threat you just made, is already sitting securely on a Department of Justice server in Washington, D.C. Higgins looked as if he was going to violently empty his stomach on the wet pavement. He looked frantically at his rookie partner for any semblance of support, but Bradley was already rapidly retreating toward his own cruiser. Bradley was furiously grabbing his shoulder-mounted radio microphone to immediately contact their watch commander. The rookie wanted absolutely no part of the monumental, catastrophic career suicide that Higgins had just committed. "Agent Montgomery, sir," Higgins pleaded, holding the leather badge case out with both hands as if trying to hand back a ticking bomb, his eyes wide with desperate panic. "Please, I am begging you, let's just calm down for a second. This was a massive misunderstanding. It's incredibly dark out here, it's late, I'm exhausted. I couldn't see clearly. We're all in the same brotherhood. We're all on the same side here." "Do not ever call me your brother," James said quietly, his voice vibrating with restrained fury as he snatched his federal credentials out of Higgins's trembling, sweaty hands. "We are not on the same side, and we never will be. You use that badge on your chest to terrorize innocent people who don't have the legal power or the financial resources to fight back. You assumed I was just a civilian you could casually bully and humiliate in the dark." James reached into his right jacket pocket and pulled out his encrypted federal cell phone. He dialed a priority number, holding his unblinking gaze firmly locked on Higgins's terrified, bloodshot eyes. Who are you calling?" Higgins asked, his chest heaving with uncontrollable panic. "I'm calling the special agent in charge of the Atlanta field office, Philip Singer," James replied flawlessly. "And then, I am personally calling the chief of the Pine Valley Police Department at his private residence. Officer Bradley, you stay exactly where you are. Do not let this man leave the scene." Bradley nodded frantically from beside his cruiser. "Yes, sir. Yes, Agent Montgomery. I'm securing the perimeter. I am not going anywhere." 20 minutes later, the dark isolation of Route 9 had been entirely eradicated by a sea of blinding, flashing lights. 6 local police cruisers rapidly arrived, blocking the highway completely in both directions. These officers had not come to back up Officer Higgins in a tense standoff. They had come to desperately perform damage control for their precinct. Captain Robert Miller, the seasoned night shift commander of the Pine Valley Police Department, threw himself out of his vehicle. He was a veteran cop and immediately recognized a massive catastrophe. He sprinted through the pouring rain toward the Tahoe, completely ignoring Higgins, who was standing alone by his cruiser, looking utterly defeated as the rain soaked his uniform. "Agent Montgomery!" Captain Miller yelled breathlessly, keeping his hands raised high to demonstrate he was unarmed as he approached. James was standing calmly, arms crossed. "I am Captain Miller, the watch commander. I just got an emergency call from Chief Harrison. We spoke with your supervisor in Atlanta. Sir, I cannot apologize enough. Empty apologies do not fix systemic constitutional violations, Captain," James said, his expression completely rigid. "Your officer deliberately lied about my driving to initiate an illegal stop. He lied about smelling marijuana to force an illegal search. He threatened to pull my wife out of this vehicle and put her face down in the dirt. If I did not have this federal badge tonight, I would be in the back of his cruiser facing fabricated felony charges." Miller swallowed hard, cold rain dripping from his hat. "I am entirely aware of the gravity, sir. Rookie Bradley gave me an unedited statement. He corroborated everything you just said. He explicitly stated Higgins willfully fabricated probable cause. He also unclipped his holster and placed his hand on his service weapon when I asked for a legal reason for my detention," James added coldly. "That is a severe federal offense. I want it placed on the official record right now that this department formally acknowledges the malicious fabrication of evidence." Meyer spoke up powerfully from the passenger seat. "Yes, madam." Miller nodded quickly, looking genuinely terrified. "I can assure you his career is entirely over. He will be suspended pending an exhaustive investigation. An internal investigation is not going to cut it tonight," James said, stepping forward, his imposing physical presence completely dominating the seasoned local commander. "This is a severe federal civil rights violation. You are going to disarm that man, right here, right now." Miller hesitated, the fraternal instinct to protect his officers battling the unavoidable reality. But looking into the cold eyes of the FBI agent, Miller knew he had absolutely no choice. "Yes, sir," Miller said in defeat. He marched furiously through the heavy rain toward Higgins. "Mitchell, hand over your service weapon immediately." Higgins looked up, his bloodshot eyes wide with sheer shock. "Captain, please, you cannot do this." "I do not care what you thought," Miller roared. "Hand over your weapon and badge now." With violently shaking hands, Higgins slowly handed over his heavy-duty gun and silver star badge. He was entirely stripped of his unearned authority in the middle of the rain-soaked highway. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," Miller ordered, angrily snapping heavy steel cuffs securely onto Higgins. James calmly walked back to the driver's seat of the Tahoe. Meyer gently placed her warm hand directly over his. James confidently started the engine, leaving the disgraced, handcuffed officer far behind them in the desolate darkness of the silent Georgia night. The quiet road was finally safe and clear for them. Did this intense confrontation keep you on the absolute edge of your seat? The abuse of power is terrifying, but watching true justice served is incredibly satisfying. If you want more gripping, real-life dramatic stories of corrupt authorities getting a taste of